Good morning, welcome to Headline Focus here live on Core Politics with me, Rob Double. It is the 12th of November 2018, Monday, the start of the week. Let's have a look at what's making the political headlines. Now to start off with, just come in this morning actually, just before I was about to do this broadcast, so when we were a little bit late going on, but Kier Starmer, the shadow Brexit secretary, said Brexit can be stopped. Now, let's go into what actually he meant by that. But he said these comments in an interview with Sky News about an hour ago. Just to give verbatim what he actually said, the Brexit can be stopped was the key line which came out of the interview. But he went on to say, but the real question is, what are the decisions we're going to face over the next few weeks and months? Decision one is on the deal. Decision two is if the deal goes down. By that I mean if the deal is defeated in Westminster, if Parliament does not back the deal which Theresa May and Theresa May's government has negotiated with Brussels, what should there be a general election? And decision three is if there's no general election, all options must be on the table, including the option of a public vote. So this is the key thing of what he's saying here. He's not saying necessarily Brexit can be stopped. Absolutely, he's saying if certain conditions are not met, then that justifies Labour's position as calling for another vote, another public vote. And that is, if the deal is voted down in Parliament, and there is no general election called as a result of that deal being voted down, as a result of the Prime Minister's position on Brexit being voted down, should there be a public vote, Labour Party could indeed support that. Now, this is similar to Emily Thornberry, the Shadow Foreign Secretary. She was on the Andrew Marr show yesterday, if you saw that. And she said very much the same thing, almost looks suspiciously coordinated. All the options remain on the table, and we would campaign for there to be a people's vote. She said that if a general election was not held following MP's rejection of an agreement with Brussels in Parliament. Very similar, if not identical really, to what Kier Starmer was saying this morning as well. Why is this getting the kind of headlines as you're seeing on my side here? Well, that's because Jeremy Corbyn has gave an interview in a German newspaper last week, if you remember, saying that Labour can't stop Brexit. And indeed, he urged his party to recognise the reasons why people voted leave. Slightly different in terms of the party position. Brexit can't be stopped, Labour Party can't stop Brexit, versus actually Brexit can be stopped if certain conditions are not met. And these are within the senior members of the Labour Party, Shadow Brexit Secretary, Shadow Foreign Secretary, versus the leader of the actual party in terms of what the Labour Party's potential could be in terms of shaping what happens to do with Brexit. Now, I should say party policy with regards to what the Labour Party in their party conference actually agreed on in September actually supports to some extent what Kier Starmer and Emily Thornberry have been saying. The Labour may support a fresh Brexit referendum if Parliament rejects a deal agreed with the EU by the Prime Minister and a general election doesn't follow. That was actually agreed at the conference. So in terms of what the party position is, and Kier Starmer was keen to point this out this morning, there isn't actually a disparity between what Jeremy Corbyn perhaps was saying, what the Labour Party position actually is, and what Kier Starmer was saying this morning. That's the clear position, and Jeremy signed up to that. I'm signed up to that, and that was the position that was passed at Labour Party conference, one of the reports coming through this morning. This is important because this gives you, to some extent, the weight of the parliamentary vote that's going to go through the Commons and the Lords in terms of the deal on Brexit. If there is a deal, this parliamentary vote is going to be so significant in terms of shaping what the deal is and what the circumstances are in terms of Brexit, even whether there will be a second referendum or not. So that's something for us to look out for in our diaries over the next few months. Labour Party, of course, said that they will vote down any deal which comes back from Brussels if it does not meet their 6 tests. Remember those 6 tests for an agreement as well. Next up, though, let's talk about what's going on in the real-time negotiations. The EU and the UK were in negotiations over the weekend. Ollie Robbins and Sabine Wayard apparently thrashing it out in Brussels. Main sticking points remain, however, and these are the key aspects which will no doubt be shaping the agenda this week, is how the backstop, in terms of this backstop customs union arrangement, will be brought to an end. Now, this is a really important issue. Second issue is whether the EU would maintain its access to British fishing waters during the period, and also this whole idea of a level playing field if a backstop plan is initiated. How can they ensure that there will be a level playing field between the UK and the EU in terms of this agreement? Now, the FT is reporting today that the EU is pushing for Britain to accept as part of the Brexit backstop plan stringent environmental targets and also also European oversight of state aid rules to resolve the issue of the Irish border. Now, this would be policed by the European Court of Justice. I don't need to tell you how toxic this will be in the Conservative Party, particularly amongst those who voted for Brexit as a driving factor to get away from the European Court of Justice, to get away from any kind of regional powers being able to dictate what happens in UK courts and UK legislation. But interestingly, this whole idea of what will happen in terms of the backstop, if it is implemented, coming to an end, there's obviously many in the Conservative Party putting significant pressure on Theresa May at the moment for there to be an absolute mechanism for the UK to unilaterally pull itself out of a backstop agreement as and when there's time. Now, the EU is fighting against that, and this is a key clinch point, which over the next few days will no doubt come to the front, and it'll be really interesting to see how this develops. So that's one to keep an eye on. And one of the key things that is such a concern for Theresa May in terms of that parliamentary vote, if there is no mechanism in terms of this backstop for a unilateral ability for the UK to pull out, will it get through Parliament? Because will it get the support of those Brexit members of Parliament who are pushing for that to happen as an absolute? Really, really interesting stuff. That, no doubt, expect more lines on that today and indeed in the coming few days. Finally, one more story then is two Johnsons, two members of the same family, but one key message. Now, Boris Johnson used his Daily Telegraph column, which came out earlier on this morning, calling for the Cabinet to stage a mutiny over the Prime Minister's preferred Chequers plan in terms of the EU withdrawal agreement. Now, we just talked about the backstop. Remember, the backstop is just literally an insurance policy if there is no agreement on the withdrawal agreement and there is no agreement on the future relationship with Europe. This is talking about the Chequers plan, which is hopefully for the Prime Minister what will be agreed upon in some form with the EU. Now, let's look into what he actually said. The plan will force the UK to remain in captivity and warns the Prime Minister is on the verge of total surrender to Brussels, and going on to say, even the unilateral power to withdraw from the backstop would make little difference. Now, why I say about the two Johnsons, obviously you've got Joe Johnson here as well as Boris Johnson. Joe Johnson resigned last week, if you remember, in those stories. Both of them, however, one of them comes from the Remain side, one of them comes from the Brexit side, have, oddly enough, the same message for the Prime Minister, which is they agree that the Prime Minister's tweaked Chequers plan is a disaster and should not be the proposal put forward. Both of them are going for that, despite being from different sides of the argument, but despite them having different views on the UK's relationship with Europe. And this highlights the problem politically for Theresa May, is that actually there is some agreement, to some extent, between Brexit voters and Remain voters over the lack of, how the Chequers plan is not really the agreement, is in fact a disaster in terms of an agreement for Brexit to actually be happening. This goes on to further reports that's come through this morning, BBC scoop, saying that several cabinet ministers actually expressed doubts from the Chequers plan from the very beginning. So remember when Boris Johnson resigned, David Davis resigned, there were many other ministers reportedly who raised their concerns at that stage, including some former Remain supporters as well. Again, this goes back almost completely to this parliamentary vote, this meaningful vote on Brexit. If there are Remain supporters and there are Leave supporters who are not prepared to sign up to an agreement which looks similar to Chequers, which comes to the Commons, or comes to Parliament, I should say, then there will be a serious issue for Theresa May in that she'll be under serious threat for her agreement not to get through Parliament, not to be approved by Parliament, and possibly then a general election or possibly some fallout in terms of her leadership, and certainly the possibility of a hard Brexit happening. So definitely this is a real crunch time. A lot of papers saying this is a week where an agreement has to happen. They've been saying that for quite a few weeks though, so take that with a pinch of salt. But over the next few days we should see coming to the forefront some of these real political dynamics, both in the Conservative and the Labour Party, to do with Brexit, really making a significant difference to the outcome of these negotiations. That's pretty much it to start the week. You're up to date. Don't forget you can find all the latest on what we're doing here on Core Politics on our Facebook page and Twitter right here. If you want to talk about one of the stories we've covered or indeed something we've missed, the comment box is below. And of course, my Twitter is @RJHW, so have a chat with me on there. See you again on Wednesday morning around about 9 o'clock.